Hey folks, totally not named Dan here, though you can call me that if you want. And today we're here to talk about the new Challenger series. Now, I'm a little late on this. We've had time to play around with the Challenger series a bit already. I've had time to play around with it, and I have some thoughts on it. There is also a Critical Role one that maybe you'll see a little bit of in the future. I'm hoping you will. Some of the cards in it are really good, but some of them are also not that great. And to discuss the whole thing, I'm bringing in my buddy here, Cris.
Hi Dan, hey everybody. Definitely named Cris. I'm back.
Well, how definitely named Cris you are, I don't know, because your online name is Cris without a H.
Well, it's a spelling to be determined, but definitely the sound is right.
Okay. But yeah, Cris, you met him before in my Mirio deck video. Specifically, a friend from locals who I've been helping build decks a little bit.
Yeah, lots of good advice and been helped with deck construction by Dan, particularly when it comes to upgrading Challenger decks at points as well. So we have lots of experience with seeing them in live action. Yeah, excited to talk about them.
Oh, we're not talking about the live action Bebop. That's horrible.
That's a whole other episode.
Yeah. But yeah, this, you will see on here, one of the things that's annoying me about it is it's listed at £30 down from 35. I'm very happy with Patriot Games for doing that because, well, even they recognize that 35 was a stupid price when the previous starter decks were a lot cheaper.
Contrast was really big when you had those like $9.99 ones, for like Mirio or Ochaco. Like you could almost get 3 of those for the price. Well, you could.
Yeah, so the way it was initially the starter decks were sort of 20 to 25 pounds and would come with a UR of some sort. But it essentially meant that you were paying 12 quid for the UR, we found out, when they brought the price of the decks down to between 10 and 12. And the only change was that the UR got shunted out.
I got into the game a little later than you, and I ended up catching up all in one go. And I was surprised that the UR was in there, and I was really lucky that I did pretty well. I got a Detroit Smash, I got a Naval Laser Beam, so I did well with my URs.
Yeah, you got some nice stuff, but there were some URs that were like a quid, and so did not make up for the difference. And yeah, the price difference between the old decks and then the sort of 10 to 12 pound ones when Mirio came out was drastic. And I loved that Mirio hit such a better price point because it was so much easier to say, hey, just get 2 of this, you'll have a competitive deck. And the thing with Mirio was it was a competitive deck.
It was a deck that was subject to getting better once other things were introduced to it, but we'll talk about this later. As it stood, it did pretty well on its own, and even better, I think, that shelf appeal when you see $9.99, because that's less than a tenner, and if you've got a crisp note in your pocket and you're a brand new player, it's very appealing. When you see 25, you're like, well, I don't know if this game is what I'm looking for yet. I don't want a big old box in my wardrobe if I'm not going to be playing regularly. But $9.99 seems like something you could take a punt on for the price of a cheap meal.
Yeah, I mean, I just picked up a Pokemon deck just because it has my favorite Pokemon on the front of it. My favorite new one, anyway.
Nice.
So I very much know that just if it's cheap, people will buy it strategy.
Collectability works best as an introduction when things are cheap.
Yeah, but yeah, you said later we'll talk about the Mirio. Actually, probably don't need to talk about the Mirio much more than this. We've done a whole video on the starter deck from Mirio, how you went 50-50 with it at locals, which, surprisingly competitive out the box, and then how we upgraded it so that you could win the entire event.
Yeah, the more you upgraded, the less it felt like the original deck, because the original one had lots of things that really incentivize you to change the direction of your attacks, whereas the good punch package became more of a focus with using Mirio's on-face abilities to enhance that. But still, the power level was well respectable, and yeah, it's worth watching that video just to go into it a little bit more. But yeah, you're right. We can look at new topics now.
I'll link that in the description. There are banned cards in the deck now, and it is a different deck size to the current one because they changed the rules on that. But it's still very much worth looking at, and Mirio is still very much a competitive character. So moving on over, though, I would like to look at the contents of my egg today, which is a spike deck that I took to Retro Nationals. So here we are, back in the deck view, and you will see this is Well, it's not the current Spike. This is my own personal Spike card that I've actually photographed, so you can see that this is signed by Steve Bloom himself.
No way.
This is entirely why I brought the deck to Retro Nationals. My previous deck was banned due to, well, Punch and Judy being a stupid card. So I had to put something together at about 2 in the morning, basically, and went, oh, I got this starter deck with a signed character in front. Let's just shove a bunch of MHA cards in and see what happens.
It's a really nice looking card.
It is. You'll notice he's 724, which is just kind of dumb.
Yeah, he's got a lot of health and a big hand.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a ton of health, but it's a ton of health for the hand size he has.
Absolutely, yeah. Comparing it to like the 719s or the 720s. Yeah, pretty generous.
And you'll see
really like the look of it.
His thing is he flips foundations for plus speed, then gets plus or minus damage based on who has the most foundations flipped. That's his whole deal. So he does also have a little bit of unflipping, which was what I decided I wanted to do with this deck. If we can unflip stuff for speed, I also figured let's add in this cape that unflips, which turned out to actually be too slow, interestingly enough. This card that unflips when it comes down, and most importantly, window shopping, which we now get to use like 3 times or more in a turn, just because we can keep unflipping it. But what made this killer was in fact not so much that as the actual Spike kit, because you could add a lot of speed to everything, 8+2 speed at everything for a start. And then we had stuff like, say, Jaw Jammer that would always guaranteed do at least 4 damage. We had cards like High Roundhouse Kick that were hard to block and did 9. We had Swimming Bird that would just get plus a stupid amount. And we had Vengeance of the Fallen Angel, which if your opponent's out of resources, if they can't block you properly and you know it, you just make it a 12 damage attack. Or failing that, you leave it at 6 and say it's unblockable. The final thing to add in terms of adding damage is Ending the Dream here, which is just a foundation that destroys for plus 4 damage. But plus 4 is a lot of damage.
It is, especially when added on a throw.
Well, yes and no. On a throw, it's essentially only plus 2 because they're going to block it and take half. Whereas if you can make the attack fast enough that they can't block it, or they've just run out of hand blocking your other things, that's plus 4. And it's actually all 4 going through.
Well, that's true as well, yeah. They are going to be forced into blocking on the throw, aren't they? But still, 4 is a more than respectable amount to add to any attack.
Yeah. And this whole deck, it didn't win. It lost primarily to Akuma, who basically everybody lost to anyway. Akuma was stupid.
So you're in good company if everybody lost to Akuma.
Yeah. But, I mean, it went 50-50 at the event. I've talked in the past about how ridiculous a format Retro is. The fact that this modified starter deck, with just a few My Hero cards thrown in, is holding its own in Retro. There's a lot about the power level of Spike.
Yeah, and I don't have a lot of experience in Retro, but I assume there's some cards in Retro that the current design paradigm doesn't allow for. This deck doesn't necessarily seem to have those. It seems to rely on its consistency, adding speed, adding damage, and what Spike's got on face. But, I don't see dirty tricks in this deck, so to speak.
So the one dirty trick is just repeatedly unflipping window shopping, which does just make you more consistent for the duration of the turn, basically. It let this deck go crazy in terms of fixing its checks and just throwing attack after attack after attack. But in terms of actual consistency, there's not even a ton of that here. Because, yeah, we've got a whole load of different attacks that all do pretty good damage and stuff. But actually, we got one copy of our kill card, Vengeance of the Fallen Angel. And one of the games I won just because I drew that at the right time. And my opponent went, you're on 3 foundations. There's no way you kill me this turn. And I'm like, okay, Vengeance of the Fallen Angel, blow up 2 of my foundations. Oh, look, there's 20 damage. Flip window shopping. Oh, look, there's a 5 on top. Next attack kills you.
Crazy.
It's surprise it does massive damage. But also, it's got a few other things. Like, if you do a little bit of damage, but not enough, you've got Sing for Me. Changes your momentum into health on another block. And then it has just some really good blocks like Nothing Like Andy. Doesn't count towards progressive as a block because it removes itself from the game. Or Syndicate Target, costs you a health, but it is a 0 modifier block that's also a 6 check. And just, it puts up a decent defense as well. You can survive just enough to maybe get another turn, to try again if it didn't draw the right attacks or anything. Oh, and Red Dragon Assassin here is just silly. Red Dragon Assassin trades for whatever your opponent's best foundation is. And in a format where foundations are even better, well...
It's not there anymore.
It does a lot.
Yeah. And we are seeing those spike attacks find a place in other decks on Symbol as well. Like, it's quite common for me to see a Jaw Jammer, or is it Falling Heel Kick?
Yeah, so I was going to mention that.
I can see them a lot.
Because when the Spike Challenger deck was coming out, we found out there'd be some reprints in it. And that was what I was most excited for, was that it was bringing back things like Jaw Jammer, which is just a huge damage throw, and Falling Heel Strike, which just does crazy things in terms of unflipping foundations and allowing interactions there. And also, we were actually getting that Ending the Dream, which is a really good card. And finally, Awake, which works quite nicely in Tsuyu, but unfortunately, due to the way that Standard works, the two couldn't really be run together anymore.
I think in terms of our locals, we tend to see these underwater. Perhaps that Symbol could really have used these attacks.
So I think Death is actually the place for Ending the Dream.
Right, okay.
But, I mean, stun your opponent down and then just throw a huge attack by destroying your foundations, for example. And I think Jaw Jammer kind of works the same, though Jaw Jammer does work very nicely in Tiger just by being a throw.
Yeah.
But yeah, Falling Heel Strike, absolutely. It's a water card, or, I mean, again, I'd run it on Death just to get it with window shopping. But in general, water is the place for it. And water lets it do funny things with Plier Body, with sticky balls, with all that sort of stuff. It's a good card. But let's have a look at the actual Challenger deck now, shall we?
Yeah, great idea.
If we go over here, you see the full thing. You'll see a bunch of the reprints. We've got that Falling Heel Strike over here. We've got the High Roundhouse Kick. We've got the Jaw Jammer, all in the new frames, which I've talked about being terrible frames in the past. I want to not entirely take that back, but take it back a little, because part of my issue with these frames is that they look so ridiculously dated. But when you pair them with a retro anime like Cowboy Bebop, that isn't really a problem. It looks the part.
Yeah, I'd agree. The font looks a little different, and I think it kind of matches the aesthetic more than the font we're used to. I think it changed again for the Critical Role Challenger.
Yeah.
I think this suits it best.
So you haven't been around with UniVersus as much as I have. Basically, every IP gets its own font. There's a font for My Hero, there's a font for Cowboy Bebop, there's a font for Trigun, there's a font for Critical Role.
I see. Okay.
For Yu Yu Hakusho.
I think this font is a little more readable as well. I think this looks best. It matches that lo-fi classic anime look.
I do still think the enhance and throw and everything could really do with that gradient back.
Agree.
But otherwise, can't say I dislike the way this looks.
Yeah, and the alt arts looks really good as well.
Oh, absolutely. I really love the alt art for Ending the Dream, which I will put up if I can.
Yeah, please do. It's excellent. Those character alt arts are they're gold dust, tricky to get.
But yeah, you'll see
right.
There is also a whole bunch of new cards in here. The Questioning Threat, Fallen Angel's Revenge, Hunter's Pursuit, and then Split Second Standoff, which is a comparatively crappy card to replace the Vengeance of the Fallen Angel that we lost. Because could you just imagine if this came with 2 copies of Vengeance of the Fallen Angel and that was playable against My Hero cards?
Yeah, you'd be having a different time, wouldn't you? Split Second Standoff is a tricky one. That 6 check is tricky to argue.
The
place for that in this deck.
I mean, it's still an alright card. I think I've seen some places where it's been crazy, but I can't remember quite what. It's nothing amazing, though. Then we have the brand new action, Welcome to Spaceland. This just says if you've counted to 10 face downs between players, then just make your attack unblockable. But you end the enhanced step when you do so.
That suits Spike really well, because you're going to have lots of face downs. And hopefully by the time you launch this, you're more than halfway there with your own foundations.
So this actually kind of says a problem with the deck.
Okay.
This wants 10 face downs. Mine here wants 8. Do his aggressive thing to make them discard a card. And just, yeah, his entire deck says count to X many face downs before you really do anything. And unlike the old Spike, it can't give minus speed, it can't give minus damage, it can only give plus to his own stuff. So he's got nothing to actually keep him alive until he can get that many face downs. To even get 8 foundations, you have to play at least 2 turns of playing foundations. So he's definitely doing it turn 3 at the earliest. It, without defense, is still pretty slow in the current meta.
Yeah.
And this was the problem I found with him. It was actually taking him sort of 4 or 5 turns to reach the number of face downs he needed. And just, you don't get 4 or 5 turns. I was playing him in Standard when he came out, which was a standard where we were still allowed the My Hero stuff. So people were just playing My Hero decks against him, and I think you were the only person I managed to take a game off.
Yeah, you know what? I can't remember who I was using. I don't think it was a deck I was particularly confident in at the time.
No, it was
yeah.
Hawks or someone.
Yeah, it was Hawks, and I was still trying to get all the cards for it. I didn't have the SR, and the URs were evading me a little bit, so like the finishing power of that deck was not there yet. Basically, I wasn't able to go as fast as some of the other decks in exploiting some of the weaknesses that Spike had.
Yeah, and even then, it went 1-1. It was a draw, you didn't lose. But, I mean, just out the box, this guy is awful. Just straight up. This wasn't a major Sheffield event with all the top players. This was a random locals where one person lost one game against me.
Yeah, generally, we try and play a fairly casual play level most of the time, unless otherwise stated, so people can be prepared.
Oh, I don't. I'm just not that good.
I think you go easy on us, but I think most people like to experiment or try new things. They're not often finely tuned decks. There's room for people to maybe have a go and see what works and what doesn't. So you weren't necessarily expecting a high level of competition or even like a more hard-nosed game. So
I was expecting a mixed level of competition. I always expect Joda to come with something that will just kick my ass, but I don't expect that from the rest of you usually.
In general terms, I think most of us are happy to play as much as we're happy to win. I would like to win more, but I'm not throwing together decks with the idea of I'm going to win this time. This is it.
Oh, whereas I am every week, but I'm just throwing together some ridiculous nonsense deck and going, yes, but this week I've got it optimized.
Those mad scientist decks, they sometimes they go off for sure, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that this was not necessarily a cutthroat event, and you didn't feel that Spike performed well even under those circumstances.
Yeah, I actually went away from that event pretty miserable because
you were quite excited. There's some notable reprints.
Yeah. Exactly, there were some fantastic reprints of cards I really liked, and it was a character who I'd a week or two prior really enjoyed playing. Took him to this event and I didn't feel like I had a chance in most games.
Did Faye perform any better? If you just swapped the character, not moving any cards.
Faye, but from what I've heard, not really.
Right, okay. I think Spike is known to be the better of the two, but I just wondered.
So I have since faced this Spike competitively, and he's okay. If he goes to turn 3, he can prove a threat, but also competitive decks don't always let him go to turn 3.
Be quite quick.
Yeah, and even then, there are much scarier characters to go to turn 3 against. If you go to turn 3 against Endeavor, for example, Endeavor will just absolutely wipe the floor with you.
He's already milled quite a bit by turn 3.
Yeah, turn 3, he's got his mill, he gets his plus speed on everything, he gets his plus damage on everything, he gets his pick up a free attack from outside the game. There's nothing you can do about him if you let him go that long. Whereas the same can't be said for Spike. Spike you can still deal with.
I don't think he's making a splash just yet.
He's a decent power level, but he's not really that great even then. So the fact that they told us this would be a competitive deck out of the box, and that was why this cost 35 quid rather than 12, is ridiculous. I mean, we don't have 4 OVs. This is not an optimized deck, so they're expecting you to spend 70 quid on this. And even then, it will take a lot of stuff outside the deck to make this even remotely playable.
Yeah, you kind of set yourself up for a tough time when you tell somebody this is going to rock your world. Like, you are going to get, really excited about this one. I mean, I suppose that term is subjective, like competitive wear against 2. But like, I think they know what it means, and we have a rough understanding of what competitive means when somebody says it, and it really wasn't. And the irony being that it was less competitive than the ones that had not been promised to be competitive. And have similar statements been made about the Critical Role decks in terms of competitiveness?
Not did they say overly, but the Challenger series, when it was introduced, was all supposed to be that level of competitive.
I see. Well, yeah, again, the prophecy has not come true, per se, out of the box.
I will say, I played Nott, the Goblin, at locals recently, because we didn't have enough players for a full event. We just had the 3 of us, so we were playing casual games. I'm like, okay, yeah. Are you okay with me to play this just out the deck box? against your My Hero characters just for fun tonight. And
Mhm.
so I faced off against everybody with that. Everybody was playing really slow decks. I was the only person to manage to finish a round, and just because of
Wow.
that, I won.
Nice. Well,
But
yeah, I think Nott's a bit aggro.
Nott's a little bit aggro, but not sort of needs a little bit of setup and then goes really aggro, I think.
Mm. Yeah.
Once you got
Yeah.
your flasks and stuff down, there's not a vast amount that can be done to stop Nott.
Nice. Well, I'm really happy to hear that. I'm looking forward to being with Nott soon.
Yeah. But also
yeah.
the optimized Nott deck that I've put together for you uses 8 Nott cards in it.
I consider that deck to be that deck list to be Christmas coming early. I didn't quite anticipate anything that would be as powerful as we predict it will be.
Oh yeah, God, that deck is just absurd. I am
Well, yeah,
absolutely
look forward to
sure
it.
that you'll see it
Absolutely
on
sure.
this channel soon.
More
Because
sure than UniVersus were when they predicted the competitive nature of Spike.
yeah. I mean, when they say competitive, I was not expecting it to realistically mean we'll take a nationals or a regionals or anything like that, right?
Mhm.
I wasn't even convinced it would be able to qualify for those events. What I was hoping for was that it would at least, rock a local. The same way out the box Mirio, well, out the box Mirio went 50-50, but a little bit better than that, a little bit better than out the box Mirio, and I'd have been happy to call it competitive.
And even though it's 50-50, like each individual game was a relatively competitive. I didn't ever get steamrolled, and I'm not even a very good player. You felt like he could stand up on his own a little bit, and you saw the potential for more, which you didn't necessarily feel for Spike.
Yeah, exactly. Spike, you felt like there was nothing he could do. Mirio, absolutely, 100%, you knew he had a chance because he was that good out the box and he could only get better.
Yeah, you were kind of measuring a ceiling, aren't you? When you bust open like a little starter or a challenger deck, you kind of unconsciously saying like, where's the ceiling, where's the floor for this?
Yeah.
And what adjustments do I need to make to get there? And like, I think that, you could quickly, after a couple of games, estimate the ceiling for Spike was just simply not as high. Even with changes to the kit, characters on face abilities not quite as good as old Spike, and thus, regardless of what you threw in there, just wasn't going to be a high ceiling.
Yeah. And from what I've heard, what's been going around recently, apparently Mirio wasn't even the most competitive MHA starter.
Oh, really? Is it one of the newer ones?
Mirio was
Ochaco?
up there, but apparently the new Ochaco is almost perfect out of the box and just needs a few more high attacks.
It's really interesting, because having played a few games with that character in a much more upgraded deck, it did seem powerful. I wasn't sure if it was quite on that level, but I could definitely feel the ceiling, again, was quite high. It did seem like a player with more practice would really have piloted this, and it almost pilots itself.
Yeah, I think Ochaco was honestly pretty darn good. But also, talking about decks that you can take, modify, and make something really competitive out of, like, say, that Nott deck, we do also have a list here from Joda, submitted for the sake of this video. This is Wolfwood, or as Joda insists on calling him, Fire Jesus. Took me a moment to work out why he was Fire Jesus, and then I went, oh, duh. It's because he's taking up the cross.
Big old crucifix.
Like Wes from Tales of Fantasia. But yeah, big old crucifix that turns out to be his gun. He just has this giant cross-shaped gun. But his whole thing is just, you throw in a few obvious attacks, and then, oh look, he's a ranged deck.
Mm.
His every attack, he mills 1 to get +3 damage, which is not even really a cost. Especially when it powers up things like your Frigid Heatwave here.
You're going to be really happy with that big fat discard pile when Frigid Heatwave comes out and you've got 4 of them, so it's going to come out again and again and probably again, and you'll hit ranged attacks in there every time.
Yeah, but we also have this Twisting Azure Inferno, which says if its damage is 7 or greater, the rest of your checks get +1 and your rival's checks to play blocks get -1. So essentially it's all your attacks get +1 speed, and this doesn't count towards progressive is what it's doing.
Going to get to 7 quite quick.
Well, it's going to get to 7 as soon as you use your character ability. It is entirely free.
Exactly, yeah.
It's busted. And then the other thing this does is you can discard a momentum at the start of your combat phase, draw 2 cards, gain 2 health. So he heals back up even though he's a 628. And in addition to that, drawing cards turns on Talented Baker here, which gives his everything +1 speed. And let's say he doesn't get the momentum. Well, then you use Bakugo stuff. You use Latent Skill. Discard 2, draw 2, filters your hand, and turns on the Talented Baker again.
Did I see Hell Spiders on the list as well?
Oh yeah, of course we have Hellspider here.
So that's also going to mill. Your string of attacks going to get buffed again.
Yep.
Following Twisting Out. It seems like there's quite a few lines you can make in this deck. Like, you've got a few routes to victory in which you know, okay, I follow this with this with this, and then the blue.
Yeah, and then we just throw in things like Ice Storm and Twisting Surroundings. They're just absolutely stupid blocks. And yeah, this deck absolutely stomped us.
Oh no.
One of the cards in here that I thought was actually the best, which I wasn't expecting to be quite that level of powerful, was Avoiding Conflict. Because Avoiding Conflict places itself on the bottom, so then you can guarantee to mill it when you want, and get that +2 damage, -2 speed, whichever one you want out of it. It is an incredibly good card.
Yeah, tricky to get outside of the Challenger deck as well.
Yeah, because nobody's selling it separately.
Of course, yeah, they want to keep it. It's good. I have to find a way to get some of those, but it seems very good, particularly in a mill strategy.
Yeah, because that goes in the Nott deck, which is also a tiny bit mill. But yeah, that's Wolfwood. I think Wolfwood is the most competitive thing to come out of that set of Challenger decks, and that's from the Trigun one.
Some really decent draw in this deck, which is going to keep that hand full.
Yeah.
Tank of Gas is ready to go for long strings of big attacks. It just seems like a character with a nice high ceiling, as that phrase has come up a few times.
Yeah. But I mean, his floor's not even that bad. It's just +3 damage on everything at basically no cost. Because, if he said mill 2, he might cycle once. If he said mill 3, he might actually have to think about it. But at mill 1, that's not hurting him at all.
No, not really, especially when you want, again, ranged attacks in the graveyard. You're going to be pretty happy about it when you see it go away.
If anything, he's not milling enough for the Hellspider.
Yeah, possibly. But, to some degree, you're going to be happy either way. Because you're seeing your ranged attacks go into the graveyard. Like, oh, well, that's great. That's going to help my Frigid Heatwave. But then when it actually comes to the point where you cycle, you're going to be happy because all your good stuff's back in the top again. So it's like a win-win situation almost. You're going to be happy at whatever stage you're at. A really well-constructed deck.
I mean, I think he could use a few tweaks. Just run more copies of certain things. Like, there is no reason to be running only 3 copies of Avoiding Conflict beyond availability.
Yeah.
That should be an instant 4 of in basically any deck that self-mills on symbol. And probably any deck that doesn't, to be honest.
Is it because there's only 3 in the Challenger deck?
Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, that spare one is not quite worth £35.
No, it's not worth it as a £35 card, but at the same time, it is a hell of a card. I mean, basically, the worst thing this card can be is enhance, fix your last check if you get to the bottom of your deck, which you might not, draw a card. So it's just a free change this card for another one. It then also has the on mill effect, it then also has the fixing that last check. You don't necessarily care about both of those, but you might. And at its worst, it means you run a 56 card deck rather than a 60.
There's a nice block mod on this card as well. Like, actions are sometimes a little bit tricky because, they do have a higher difficulty, meaning that you think to yourself, oh, it's near or mid the end of a string, I'm not sure if I'll pull it off.
No, this one's just so free.
Yeah.
And I mean, I run any means necessary in decks specifically to get my deck size down. When Ready Get Set Go was legal, I ran it in decks specifically to get my deck size down. So Avoiding Conflict, oh look, specifically gets my deck size down.
Yeah,
it's just more of the same. It is not a fair card. But yeah, that's the Fire Jesus deck, and just wanted to show that off as basically the upper ceiling of what you can do with the first wave of Challenger decks. Because, yeah, there is some room for being massively competitive there. Wolfwood is not an entirely fair character. He is incredibly powerful. It's just not...
Not right out the box.
Not right out the box.
That's
you
just
have
kind
to
of
change a lot. It's not what was promised, and the other characters aren't anywhere near as good as this one. I've faced the main character of Trigun, whose name's currently eluding me, and he's decidedly okay.
And of course, the higher price means that the weight of that promise carries more. Whereas, if they were cheap, I think it would be a little bit more forgivable. I think people wouldn't be quite so grinding their teeth over it.
Yeah, I mean, if it was the same price as Mirio, people wouldn't mind having to do the same amount of work as they do for Overhaul.
Yeah, exactly. And, they would forgive the fact that I was told this would be competitive. They'll be like, well, at least it was cheap.
Well, I mean, even then, it has the option to be somewhat competitive if you tweak it a lot.
Yeah, but you've already spent £35 in theory. The idea is, well, I don't have that much more to spend on cards at the moment. I'm going to have to wait.
Yeah, I'm not going to tweak this thing that I spent 3 times the price of a normal starter deck on It's only as good as
Exactly.
a normal starter deck, if that. The price point is just ridiculous. I think that's the real issue here. But also, it would be nice if they didn't make promises they couldn't keep.
Yeah, and I wonder if the price point is higher because of the the promise of the alt art packs that come with. Is that what they're using to justify? And really, would we be better off? They are wonderful, but like, would we be better off without them and them being $9.99?
I
think
would
some
say
people would
so. I think it would probably still have to be a little more than $9.99, just because it's not just the alt arts, it's also 10 more cards because the deck size went up.
True. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Maybe if it was 15,
Yeah.
you'd still be a bit happy, or even 20.
Yeah, I mean, if it went back to the old 20 to 25, that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. But it's the fact that we went from 20 to 25 down to 10 to 12, and then, right, okay, let's triple that.
And of course, some places will sell it for more than 35 as well. I have seen it go for 40 in some retailers, which is
horrifying.
It is, but some retailers will have a go and see if people will take it. And so 35 is again probably more the floor than it is the ceiling for paying for these challenger decks.
Well, it seems like 30 is the floor, but 35 is the RRP. You can't really fault anyone for charging 35 for it.
Exactly.
And, not every business has a great profit margin. Some will genuinely have to charge more than RRP.
Yeah, absolutely. They're not all Forbidden Planet or Traveling Man who have multiple stores. Some are independently owned. And it's justifiable, but tricky on the player end of it when you're paying that much.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the thing. I don't blame anybody but UVS Games for that price.
Yeah.
But they're hella pricey. And the alt arts, nice as they are, they don't really help me as a player. And people are having issues with the alt arts of a lot of them are in fact just foily versions of the regular arts for the Critical Role stuff. So the resale value is not as high. And so they're not making up for the price point nearly as much.
Characters obviously go for the most. The art is very good.
Oh, yeah.
And,
I've seen characters go for anything between £30 and £300.
The cool thing is, of course, when they're out on your playmat, you're going to see them the whole game. That money is kind of well spent in that it's not buried in your deck.
Yeah, exactly.
So you can show it off. Understandable. I really like them.
It's why nobody likes the Chrome attacks.
True.
One copy of a Chrome attack you were never going to see.
I see it.
One copy of a character, it's always there.
You don't need 4, you just need 1.
With a few minor exceptions, but yes.
Yeah. Twice, maybe. We need some more.
Yeah, more twice would be nice. I was actually thinking about, there's a brand new character coming out, a new Toga, who uses character cards in discard pile.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
But we talked about her in a previous video that you won't have seen just yet, and, I'll link that in the description down below and talk to you a bit more about it off camera, Chris.
Oh yeah, sounds exciting.
In the meantime, I think we said everything we needed to say. Gone over a little bit the power levels of the challenger decks. I'm still very much excited for the future challenger decks. I am really looking forward to playing Godzilla. I am really looking forward to Mothra providing us with our first 8-hander in years. And I'm really looking forward to Ghidorah being a 10 health character with 3 lives.
Yeah, they are big and stompy.
There's so much fun stuff in there to exploit. It is going to be ridiculous. But I'm not expecting them to be competitive out of the box because that's kind of been disproven by this point.
Yeah, it has. But we can, with those adjusted expectations, we can look forward to all new characters and cards that may make their way into other decks as well.
Absolutely. I mean, we talked about avoiding the conflict here. Avoiding the conflict is not the only card from these decks that sees play, but it is the most auto-include. There are good cards in these decks. They're just not necessarily for every deck, most of them, and they're not necessarily the entire decks. They don't make the decks on their own.
Yeah, not like that.
Personally, with the Critical Role stuff, I would suggest putting Nott's Flask in basically everything.
Yeah, even, I think it's had an errata recently that hasn't hurt it too much.
No, the errata's only made it better. The errata's made it not lower your speed while in your discard pile.
Launch the Party Poppers, that's music to my ears.
The errata has done nothing to hurt it. But yeah, that's it for today. We'll catch you again next time, where we'll look more in depth at a single deck rather than a few different ones.
Exciting. Bye, everybody.
Bye.